In the early months of 1942, as Japan's military rapidly took control of large parts of Southeast Asia, a quiet but deadly resistance began to form in the thick jungles. A mysterious man appeared from the edge of the forest, mimicking the sound of a bird. Carefully and silently, he placed a bamboo stick packed with homemade explosives against a railway bridge used by the Japanese army. After slipping back into the shadows, the makeshift bomb exploded with a massive roar, tearing the bridge apart and sending its structure crashing into the river below. Within just 2 weeks, similar surprise attacks had caused hundreds of Japanese casualties and crippled important supply routes. The Japanese High Command believed they were up against a large, well-trained unit of around 200 elite commandos hiding deep within the jungle. In reality, it was a much smaller group led by a British naturalist and former teacher turned guerrilla fighter, Captain Freddie Spencer Chapman, who was now being hunted by a force of 2,000 Japanese soldiers, and if the enemy didn't kill him, the unforgiving jungle might. Freddie Spencer Chapman was born in London on May 10, 1907. Tragedy struck early in his life. His mother died shortly after he was born, and during the First World War, his father, one of the many soldiers killed in the bloody Battle of the Somme, never returned home. Orphaned at a young age, Chapman and his brother were taken in by an elderly minister and his wife in a quiet village nestled in the Lake District of northern England. From his early years, Chapman learned to depend on himself. He found school dull and uninspiring, preferring instead to roam the wild countryside, spending long hours alone surrounded by nature. Over time, he developed a deep love for the natural world. He would later reflect that he began as a passionate collector of butterflies, then turned to studying wildflowers, and finally became fascinated with birds. As his interest in wildlife grew, so did his knowledge and skills. He taught himself how to find his way without maps, how to survive in harsh conditions, how to read the signs of the weather, how to move silently across difficult ground, and most importantly, how to trust his instincts. In the 1930s, Chapman pushed himself even further, taking part in extreme expeditions that tested both his body and mind. While exploring the frozen wilderness of Greenland, he lost all the nails from his fingers and toes due to the brutal cold. He once endured 20 terrifying hours struggling to survive in a kayak during a violent storm. On another occasion, he avoided falling into a deadly crevasse by desperately hanging onto the handles of his dog sled. In the Himalayas, he became the first person to climb the towering 24,000-foot peak of Chomolhari, an achievement so difficult it wouldn't be repeated for more than 30 years. By 1938, he had taken a teaching job at Gordonstoun School in Scotland, where one of his pupils was a young Prince Philip. But as war clouds gathered over Europe, Chapman realized his unique skills could be more useful elsewhere. In June 1939, sensing the world was heading for conflict, he joined the 4th Battalion of the Seaforth Highlanders, a regiment in the British Army. 3 months later, World War II officially began. Chapman's unusual talents quickly drew attention. The military saw in him the perfect candidate for special missions. His rare combination of toughness, survival knowledge, and the ability to operate alone in dangerous places made him ideal for secret warfare. At first, he was sent to Australia, where he helped train soldiers in the art of guerrilla fighting. By 1941, he had moved to Singapore and joined a covert training group known as Special Training School 101. This unit was created in preparation for a possible Japanese invasion. Chapman understood how vulnerable Britain's Southeast Asian colonies were, and he suggested forming small resistance groups made up of local Malays, Chinese, and Indians. These units would be left behind to continue the fight if Singapore ever fell. However, his plan was dismissed by the British colonial governor, Sir Shenton Thomas, who thought it was unrealistic and too pessimistic. Chapman's warning proved accurate. In December 1941, Japanese forces launched their invasion. Chapman led a dangerous mission across the Perak River, gathering important intelligence about how the Japanese operated. He observed that their soldiers, lightly armed and fast-moving, were far more mobile than the slower, heavily loaded British and Indian troops. By early 1942, it was clear that Singapore was close to falling. Chapman didn't wait for permission. He took a small team with him and vanished into the deep jungles of Malaya, determined to launch a guerrilla war on his own terms. Soon after, Chapman and his men began a bold sabotage campaign. They made their own explosives using jelly-like substances hidden inside bamboo, and with these simple but deadly tools, they launched sneak attacks against Japanese troops and supply lines. Thanks to Chapman's deep knowledge of jungle survival, the group was able to move quietly, live off the land, and strike unexpectedly. Their early efforts had a huge impact. In just their first 2 weeks, they blew up 15 railway bridges, derailed 7 trains, destroyed 40 military vehicles, and caused between 500 and 1,500 enemy casualties, by Chapman's estimate. The Japanese were stunned by the destruction and believed they were dealing with a large force of at least 200 well-trained fighters. In response, they sent 2,000 soldiers into the area to find and destroy the attackers. With so many enemy troops now flooding the jungle and supplies running dangerously low, Chapman and his group faced a growing threat. They hoped to escape the region altogether, but leaving proved impossible. Instead, they ventured even deeper into the jungle and eventually connected with the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army, a communist-led guerrilla movement headed by Chin Peng, who was also fighting the Japanese invaders. Even with the protection of these rebel fighters, staying alive was incredibly hard. The jungle was thick and unforgiving. Slowly, Chapman's group started to fall apart. One by one, his fellow fighters were killed in ambushes, struck down by disease, or simply vanished into the dense forest, never to be seen again. Rescue attempts often ended in tragedy as Japanese patrols opened fire on the searchers. Chapman was the last surviving member of his original team. All lines of contact with Allied forces had gone silent, leaving him with no option but to continue alone with the communist resistance fighters. Although his former companions were gone, Chapman didn't give up his mission. Instead, he began training Chin Peng's men so they could assist in carrying out risky sabotage operations. He taught them to whistle a British tune called the Lambeth Walk, to recognize each other in the dark, while he would signal his own presence by mimicking the call of a British owl, a bird not found in the Malayan forests. However, progress often came to a stop due to severe tropical diseases. Chapman suffered from illnesses like malaria, beriberi, dysentery, and painful skin infections caused by leech bites. At one point, he was so ill, he slipped into a semi-conscious state for 17 days, battling multiple infections at once, including typhus, blackwater fever, and pneumonia. On top of these health struggles, he was also wounded twice during surprise enemy attacks, once in the leg and once in the arm. Still, he found the strength to carry on through a belief system that helped him mentally cope. He lived by a simple idea: the jungle is neutral. He believed that the jungle didn't care whether one lived or died. It was neither friend nor enemy. To survive, he needed to stay calm, think clearly, and treat every challenge as something to be handled patiently. This mindset helped him endure, even when so many others around him had fallen. Instead of seeing the jungle as a trap, Chapman found ways to use it to his advantage. He continued his interest in nature by studying local birds and gathering seeds, which he hoped to send to the Kew Gardens Research Centre in London. This not only gave him a sense of purpose, but also helped him better understand the jungle's resources, which in turn improved his chances of survival. After nearly 2 years without any outside contact, Chapman finally managed to reconnect with British forces in late 1943. In response, 2 British agents, John Davis and Richard Broome, from a special operations group called Force 136, were sent to meet up with him. But not long after, while searching for another missing British soldier, things took a bad turn. Chapman was captured by the Japanese. Even though he was still sick, he found a way to escape the camp at night while the guards were asleep. Sadly, he had to leave behind his valuable notebooks full of scientific observations. In a bold move, he later wrote a letter directly to the Japanese governor, asking that his notes be forwarded to a respected geographic society in London, if they were ever found. But the danger wasn't over. Continued enemy action forced Chapman, Davis, and Broome back into hiding with the communist fighters. They lost contact with the Allies again, and their radio equipment was too damaged to use. On top of that, all three men were still struggling with illnesses. Working together with their new allies, they came up with a clever way to fix the radio. They used parts gathered by the guerrilla fighters and powered the system using car batteries that were recharged with a foot-pedaled dynamo. Slowly, they managed to get both the receiver and the transmitter working again. At last, they were able to reach Allied command in Colombo and began organizing supply drops and sending important updates about Japanese troop movements. This transformed their small, isolated team into a key source of intelligence for the war effort. By early 1945, after 3 long years in the jungle, Chapman received word that a British submarine, the HMS Statesman, would try to pick them up. But getting to the extraction point meant crossing rough terrain from the jungle to a small island called Pulau Pangkor off the west coast of Malaya. The 3 men set off on their dangerous journey, disguised as Chinese workers to avoid attracting attention. Thanks to Chapman's years of studying wildlife and his deep understanding of local culture, they managed to travel through enemy-held areas without being detected. After finally reaching the island, the 3 men swam through the waters of Emerald Bay to reach the submarine that waited offshore. When Chapman arrived in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, in May 1945, he found out that he had been listed as missing and believed dead. At the British Embassy, he saw a book about his past travels, written as though he had already died. Even his car back home had been sold off. The man who had vanished into the jungle in 1942 had become a legend, almost like a ghost. But now he was back, and very much alive. For his incredible bravery, he was given the Distinguished Service Order, along with an additional honor bar, which was added to the many medals he had already earned for his scientific explorations. After the war, Chapman returned to education and founded the King Alfred School in Plön, Germany, to teach children of British military and civilian personnel. Yet the years of hardship had taken a toll on him. His health problems grew worse over time. In 1971, not wanting to put the burden of care on his wife, he made the tragic decision to end his own life. Still, Chapman's courage and determination left a lasting legacy. He was often compared to legendary figures like Lawrence of Arabia. Field Marshal Earl Wavell once said that both men showed how far the human body could go when the spirit inside it stayed strong, and how well they represented the British ability for independent action. Today, Chapman's remarkable story is remembered at Pulau Pangkor, the island where his final escape began. A local resort holds an annual event called Chapman's Challenge, which includes a jungle trek and a swim. Sometimes members of Chapman's own family take part. Visitors to the island can also enjoy a drink at Chapman's bar near Emerald Bay, where he once swam out to freedom. Nearby, a black marble plaque displays a quote with the words that kept him alive through it all. "The jungle is neutral." Freddie Spencer Chapman's story is one of the most powerful and inspiring tales to come out of the Second World War. It isn't just about battles and survival, but about human determination, courage, and the strength of the mind when everything else is falling apart. His life shows how a person with deep knowledge, calm thinking, and unshakable willpower can not only survive against impossible odds, but also make a lasting impact. From a quiet boy who loved nature to a lone fighter in one of the world's most brutal jungles, Chapman's journey is filled with adventure, hardship, and resilience. For anyone interested in history, war, nature, or human strength, this is a story that deserves to be explored in detail. It connects the harsh realities of jungle warfare with moments of quiet observation and personal growth. Watching this story unfold allows us to reflect on the forgotten corners of history and understand the price of freedom and sacrifice in a deeply personal way. This video takes you on a journey through one man's incredible fight, not just against the enemy, but against nature, disease, loneliness, and despair. It is more than just history. It is a reminder of how far one person can go when driven by purpose, belief, and endurance.